The courtroom was filled with quiet murmurs as Olivia Carter stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She carried herself with grace, her confidence unshaken despite the way eyes lingered on her. Some curious, others dismissive. She had seen this before. People making assumptions about her before she even spoke a word. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just here to observe. She was here to fight. Across the room, the judge, an older man with silver hair and a stern expression, barely glanced up as she approached the defendant's table. He had already made up his mind about her case. Olivia could see it in the way he shifted impatiently, as if he was just waiting to rule against her. The opposing attorney smirked, confident that the judge would take his side without hesitation. The case was straightforward, at least it should have been. Olivia had been wrongfully accused in a business dispute, a situation that should have been easily resolved with the facts alone. But as the proceedings began, it became painfully clear that logic and fairness weren't going to be enough today. The judge continuously interrupted her, cutting her off before she could finish her arguments. He nodded along as the opposing attorney spoke, barely acknowledging anything she had to say. Whispers floated through the courtroom as people watched the unfair treatment unfold. Some shook their heads, while others simply accepted it as the way things were. Olivia, however, wasn't one to accept injustice. She remained calm, her eyes studying the judge, waiting for the right moment. And then, just as the judge was about to deliver his ruling, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. "Before you continue, Your Honor, I believe it's important for the court to know that I am not just the plaintiff in this case. I am also a U.S. attorney." The room fell silent. The judge's pen froze midair. The opposing attorney's smirk disappeared in an instant. The entire courtroom shifted, the weight of her words sinking in. Everything had just changed, and they all knew it. The silence in the courtroom was almost deafening. Olivia could see the shift in the judge's expression, a flicker of surprise that he quickly tried to hide. The opposing attorney adjusted his tie, suddenly less confident than he had been moments ago. The spectators leaned in, sensing the weight of the revelation. Olivia let her words settle before continuing. "I have spent years upholding the law, ensuring justice is served fairly. And yet, here I stand, being dismissed, interrupted, and disregarded without consideration for the facts." Her tone was steady, but there was an undeniable edge of authority in her voice. The judge cleared his throat, pretending to shuffle through his papers. "Miss Carter, that information is irrelevant to the case at hand," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it held before. She didn't back down. "It's entirely relevant, Your Honor, because it speaks to the fairness of this courtroom and whether justice is truly being served here today." Her eyes met his, unwavering. The opposing attorney tried to regain control. "Regardless of her background, the evidence speaks for itself," he said, flipping through documents with exaggerated confidence. "The business contract clearly favors my client, and—" Olivia cut in smoothly. "The contract my team has already proven was altered." Yet that argument was dismissed without a second thought. She turned to the judge. "I respectfully ask that the law be followed and that my case be considered without bias." A few people in the gallery nodded, murmuring among themselves. Even the court clerk looked slightly uneasy, glancing between Olivia and the judge. But Olivia wasn't just fighting for herself. She had been in too many rooms where power and privilege dictated outcomes rather than the truth. She knew that if she didn't challenge this now, it wouldn't just be her case. It would be every person who walked into a courtroom expecting justice and instead faced dismissal. The judge exhaled slowly. "Miss Carter, let's proceed," he said, his voice more measured now. But Olivia knew this wasn't over. If anything, the real battle was just beginning. Olivia could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it shake her confidence. She had been in tougher situations before, facing down criminals, arguing against seasoned attorneys, standing her ground when no one else would. But today, in this courtroom, she was up against something even more insidious: bias hidden behind legal formality. As she gathered her notes, Olivia stole a glance at her client, a small business owner named Angela Martinez. Angela sat nervously at the table, clutching her hands together, her face tight with worry. This case wasn't just about money, it was about integrity. Angela had been deceived into signing a contract that would strip her of ownership, and Olivia had uncovered the fraudulent amendments. Yet every time she presented her arguments, she felt an invisible wall rise before her. The judge's dismissive attitude, the opposing attorney's smug confidence, it all pointed to an unfair playing field. Meanwhile, in the gallery, Angela's husband, Miguel, watched with clenched fists. He had been silent throughout the proceedings, but Olivia had seen his frustration growing. She understood why. It was difficult to sit back and watch justice slip through the cracks, especially when it affected your family. But Olivia needed to focus. She had to find a way to break through. The opposing attorney smirked, leaning forward as he spoke. "Your Honor, Ms. Carter is clearly trying to derail these proceedings with unnecessary theatrics. The contract stands as it is. My client followed all legal procedures, and any allegations of misconduct are simply conjecture." Olivia arched an eyebrow, keeping her expression neutral. "Conjecture," she repeated, flipping to a highlighted section of the contract. "I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit C. The original contract, signed and notarized, has key clauses that were altered in the final version. Alterations that were made without my client's consent." The judge hesitated, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Olivia thought she had gotten through to him. But then he waved his hand dismissively. "I don't see how this significantly changes the case, Ms. Carter. Let's move on." A hush fell over the courtroom. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. He was brushing past clear evidence, refusing to acknowledge the obvious. Why? Was he protecting someone? Was there more at play here than just negligence? She had suspected favoritism from the beginning, but this was worse. It was as if the outcome had been decided before she even walked into the courtroom. But she wasn't done. If they wanted her to back down, they were about to be very disappointed. Olivia took a slow breath, steadying herself as she glanced at Angela, whose eyes were filled with silent desperation. The judge's refusal to acknowledge the blatant fraud in front of him sent a clear message. This case wasn't about facts or justice. It was about power, and Olivia knew exactly what she had to do. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, I respectfully request a formal review of this contract under fraud statutes. The discrepancies are not minor errors. They are intentional deceptions designed to strip my client of her rightful ownership." The opposing attorney sighed loudly, shaking his head. "Your Honor, we've entertained this long enough. Miss Carter is grasping at straws, hoping to delay the inevitable. The contract is binding, and my client has every right to enforce it." The judge rubbed his temples as if he were already tired of the argument. He exhaled heavily and lifted his gavel slightly. "Denied. The court finds no reason to revisit the matter further." The sound of the gavel hitting the desk was like a punch to the stomach. Olivia felt the frustration building inside her, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she turned slightly and caught a glimpse of Miguel shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The gallery was murmuring now, sensing that something was off. Angela's hands were trembling as she whispered, "What do we do now?" Olivia met her gaze with quiet resolve. We don't back down. Then she did something that made the entire courtroom still. She pulled out her identification badge from her bag and placed it gently on the desk in front of her. The gold lettering reflected under the fluorescent lights. The judge narrowed his eyes, confused. The opposing attorney stiffened. "My name is Olivia Carter," she said slowly, letting the words sink in. "I'm not just Angela Martinez's lawyer. I am a U.S. attorney appointed to uphold justice in cases just like this." The silence in the room was deafening. The judge's expression shifted slightly. Was that recognition? A hint of nervousness? The opposing attorney swallowed hard, his smirk disappearing. And just like that, the entire case had changed. The moment Olivia revealed her credentials, a ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. The judge stiffened in his chair, shifting his gaze between her and the opposing attorney, who now looked pale. Olivia could see the internal calculations happening behind their eyes. This wasn't just another case anymore. This was now a serious legal battle with much bigger implications. Angela, sitting beside Olivia, held her breath, gripping the edge of the table. The sudden change in energy was undeniable. Whispers filled the gallery as people exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The judge cleared his throat, his usual stern demeanor faltering just slightly. "Miss Carter," he began carefully, "you're telling this court that you are not only representing your client, but that you are also a federal prosecutor." Olivia nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor. And as a federal prosecutor, I am obligated to report any instance of fraud or judicial misconduct to the Department of Justice." She let the words hang in the air, her gaze never wavering from the judge's face. That includes any case where evidence has been ignored or dismissed without proper review. The opposing attorney quickly regained his composure, forcing a laugh. "This is ridiculous. Miss Carter is attempting to intimidate the court with her position. But let's not forget, this case is about a simple contract dispute. It has nothing to do with federal law." Olivia turned to him, her expression unwavering. "Fraudulent contracts that involve interstate business transactions do, in fact, fall under federal jurisdiction. If this contract was manipulated to force my client out of her property, then that is grounds for an investigation by the DOJ." The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Olivia could see the beads of sweat forming at his temples. He knew exactly what this meant. If she escalated this further, it wouldn't just be about the case. It would be about him, about his decisions, about whether or not he had willingly ignored the truth. But just as the tension reached its peak, another unexpected voice cut through the room. "I have evidence." Everyone turned. A man in a crisp suit stood at the back of the courtroom. Olivia's stomach tightened as she recognized him. It was James Holloway, a high-profile corporate investigator. And he had just changed everything. The courtroom fell silent as James Holloway stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Olivia's pulse quickened. If he had evidence, it could be the turning point they needed. The judge leaned forward, his hands gripping the bench as he studied Holloway with wary eyes. Holloway handed a folder to Olivia, his voice steady. "This is a full audit of the financial transactions tied to the contract dispute. It shows clear signs of forgery and manipulation." Olivia quickly flipped through the pages, scanning the reports, the forged signatures, and the suspicious bank transfers. Her jaw tightened as she turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this proves beyond doubt that my client was deceived. The contract presented to this court is fraudulent." The opposing attorney's face paled. This is irrelevant," he stammered. "It doesn't change the fact that—" Olivia didn't let him finish. "It changes everything," she said, her voice firm. This court has been missiled, and if you allow this fraud to stand, it will not only be a miscarriage of justice, it will be a scandal." The judge's eyes flickered with something Olivia couldn't quite read. Fear? Guilt? Whatever it was, he took a long, measured breath before turning to the opposing attorney. "Do you have any response to these allegations?" The attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling for a way out. He opened his mouth but hesitated. There was no way to spin this. He finally lowered his gaze and shook his head. The judge exhaled sharply. "Given this new evidence, I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff. The contract is deemed void, and all assets must be returned immediately." A stunned silence filled the room. Angela clutched Olivia's hand, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but just as she thought it was over, Holloway leaned in close and whispered, "This goes deeper than you think." The judge knew about the fraud. Olivia's breath caught. The real battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Olivia's mind raced as she processed Holloway's words. If the judge had known about the fraud, then justice had nearly been sold to the highest bidder. She studied the man on the bench, watching as he quickly adjourned the court and hurried away, avoiding eye contact. It was a small victory, but the real fight had just begun. As Angela hugged Olivia tightly, relief evident on her face, Holloway stepped forward. "This judge has a history. He's ruled in favor of shady business dealings before. If you're willing to take this further, I can help." Olivia met his gaze, determination setting in. "I didn't get where I am by walking away from a fight. If corruption is running this deep, then we expose it." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Holloway worked tirelessly, gathering testimonies from past cases, tracking money trails, and uncovering connections between the judge and powerful business figures. News outlets caught wind of the investigation, and soon public pressure mounted. The judge resigned amid scandal, and legal action followed against those involved in the fraud. Angela, now freed from the weight of an unjust system, rebuilt her business and reputation. She never forgot Olivia's unwavering support. One afternoon, as they sat in a cafe reflecting on everything, Angela smiled. "You could have walked away after winning my case, but you didn't. You fought for something bigger." Olivia nodded. "Because justice isn't just about one victory. It's about making sure no one else has to fight the same battle." As she left the cafe, Olivia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fight had been tough, but it had been worth it. The system wasn't perfect, but every step toward fairness mattered. With each case, each truth exposed, she knew she was making a difference. And she wasn't done yet.